Yeah, Paul, you just like perfectly encapsulated what I was trying to say is like it's still an educational space, I think, for a
Mhm.
lot of people. It's also a solitary space, but instead of giving like XYZ advice, you're teaching by doing, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Welcome to the Delos Diaries, where we explore the untamed frontier of writing and creativity. Join your host, Paul Delos Santos, a writer and self-published author, as he navigates the ever-evolving world of storytelling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Delos Diaries. I'm your host, Paul Delos Santos, and I'm joined today by author and YouTuber Lynn D. Jung. How you doing today, Lynn?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
Well, it's always the trademark question that we ask first, every time is how it got you into writing, because it's always a different story for every writer and how they got into writing.
Oh my gosh. That's such a good question. I would say I feel like writing and reading came hand in hand with me. I was actually a late reader, so I didn't really start reading chapter books until like 4th or 5th grade. And
Oh,
yeah, from the first minute I was able to like read books on my own, I wanted to write them. I don't know what that says about me that I was like, I can do that. But yeah, I've been writing since I was a kid, pretty much for as long as I can remember, always, writing stories and books and yeah, just have been doing it consistently for decades.
yeah, it's funny to me that everyone like I started probably a little earlier than like not too much earlier than you, but starting like second, third grade, writing books and reading stories. And so for me, it's a anytime I see someone who started in elementary school, and it's like, ooh, this is good. So
Yeah.
it's like always fun. And yeah, like what did you start writing with? What were some of the original stuff that you were writing?
I distinctly remember I was, writing and printing out the chapters as I was going. Each chapter was
Mhm.
probably about one page, and it
Mhm.
was about two kids in elementary school age who were like time traveling to the era with dinosaurs. I don't even know. They were time traveling and there were dinosaurs involved because I was a huge like dino kid.
Mhm.
So I just kind of was like, I'll just put in everything I like, which is basically just children who were myself interacting with dinosaurs.
That's so weird because mine is a very similar story as well. I was a time traveling cop.
Not the time travel being like a fundamental story element for children for some reason.
Well, I think it's because we want to see eras that we only envision. I think it's one of
Yeah.
those, especially for a lot of kids, it is the dinosaur era. I think a lot of kids
Oh
want to
yeah.
be like, oh, I want to meet my first dinosaur,
Oh
and
yeah.
then it's just for me, it just became a case of like, oh, I read Gulliver's Travels or I read. I think it's just the kids version of these books, of course, but not the not the older version. But I mean, when you read those types of books, you kind of like want to, oh, what does like to be like in that era where there's no planes and no cars and just a lot of trains and steamboats. And so for me, it's like I can relate to that story. Like when you said dinosaurs and time travel, I'm like, whoa, that's very similar to my story.
I love that. Great
Yeah,
minds think alike. Great
I
child
you know
minds.
I guess. I mean, I hope someone else is out there listening. And say, if you have a kid who wrote that time travel story, don't look down on them because they have something there.
Yeah. Yeah, sound off if you also started out with that kind of backstory, I guess, in the
Yeah,
comments.
yeah. So it's I've been following your YouTube for a while, and it's transitioned a lot. Just overall, like it's transitioned from like initial travel and book reviews and everything else. But what got you into the author tube space ultimately? Because it's for me, it's one of the most interesting spaces to me because there's most of the people I've tried to interact with have been very friendly.
Yeah, I think it's also a really interesting space. I've also thank you for watching my channel for such a long
Mhm.
time and supporting. I really appreciate that. Um, but yeah, going back to what I was going to say, I think it's a space that has evolved a lot. And although I wouldn't say I'm like the most social media savvy person, I have been kind of keeping track of, I guess you could say, like the different trends or really just yeah, the trends that have been popping up in this space. So I feel like when I started out, I was very focused on making writing craft content, not so much to like teach, because at that stage in my life, I didn't realize I wanted to be a teacher,
Mhm.
but mostly to kind of think through these elements of craft for myself to better my own writing, to verbalize them and like maybe help people out and find community. And I think the person who influenced me the most in that initial stage and the person who I was watching a lot of, two people really, before I started my channel were Alexa Dunn and Lizelle Sambury. Um, and yeah, in the beginning, I feel like we were very craft focused, and now we're shifting more into almost lifestyle, but also just like everyone now seems to be, we have a great mix of people. So folks who have written like 20 books, folks who are writing their first book, and it's all about documenting your journey in a really authentic way, which I find
Mm,
interesting. And I think that when you're able to do that metacognition, and to, analyze your own work, analyze what you're doing, and verbalize it and put it on camera in a way that's interesting, it gets readers, potential readers, but also viewers really invested in your journey as a creative. So we're kind of moving away a little bit from the writing craft advice, oversaturated, because really, how many ways can you explain craft? Even
yeah,
though
I
it is
agree.
a very vast subject, into more of like a personal kind of version of authortube.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, everyone has been really wonderful. I don't think I've met any author tubers who, were bad people or anything like
Yeah.
that. No one's really like in it for the money or the fame, because it's such a small space that I mean, who amongst us is getting money and fame from this, right?
hmm Yeah, it's weird to me because it's like, and I was looking and I was doing research on what to do for AutoTube. It's like, craft stuff, it's just like, okay, that's cool. I used to be an English teacher, so I'm like, okay, well, it's just like, okay, I could do that, but I was like, do I want to do that? Because there's already so many different, like, more credible sources, so to speak, in terms of like, the big sites, like the with the cool graphics and animation. I'm like, so what can I do differently? So I figured, oh, let's do a podcast with authors and kind of learn to craft
Yeah.
through practice rather than technical aspects. And I think
Yes. Yes.
I think that's important to me because I said, let's do that and kind of teach people through other authors' point of views. And I think that's why I started the podcast ultimately. That's where it's the
Yes.
starting of it is.
Yeah, Paul, you just like perfectly encapsulated what I was trying to say. Is like it's still an educational space, I think, for a
Mhm.
lot of people. It's also a solitary space, but instead of giving like XYZ advice, you're teaching by doing, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. It's almost like experiential learning. Yeah, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I think that's why our community has kind of exploded in the past couple years, really.
Mhm. Yeah, I think also as a former as technically still am a journalist. I think I remember going to school for it and then realizing I didn't use anything I learned in college. I have a piece of paper that says I went to 4 years to journalism school, and I'm just like, I learned more in my first year in the field than I did in
Yes.
4 years of school. So I'm like,
Hmm.
I realized that writing is one of those crafts. This is like, like carpentry. It's like you can't, like, you learn the basics, but then you kind of like have to do it. You can't just sit there and just not do it. I think that's important for everyone.
Hmm. Yes, I
So
totally. Oh, sorry. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, you're okay. Sorry. I mean, sorry. You took us on your journey. I mean, you mentioned that Mothsblood is 5 years, which is your book coming out. Congratulations on that, by the way. I mean, I
Thank
want to say
you.
congratulations on getting picked up. No, take us through the initial journey of like where, like, and I know it's a long journey, so just kind of like talk us through a little bit of the journey from what came up with the idea and how, and the roadblocks that came along with it.
Yeah. I mean, uh, I think for me, so I say 5 years because the initial idea, that seed of an idea for Mothsblood, came to me about that long ago, probably a little
Mm,
bit more now. It's been some time. But let's see. I usually let ideas rest. I let them marinate. So I'll have the seed of an idea. I'll write it down. If I come up with more stuff, I'll write that down too in the same like notes app or whatever else I have going on. And I'll kind of just let it sit. Like I usually do not pursue writing right away. And what made me really kind of dive deep into Mothsblood, which was specifically, I think I really started taking it seriously in 2022 or 20. I I don't know. I have memories of writing it while abroad, but I've been abroad a couple times these past
I
few
think I
years.
remember your first writing blog was in Thailand. So, and that's when you were in your
Yeah,
second draft. That was in your
yeah.
second draft. So,
Yeah, yeah, that was about 2 years ago. And then I think I was drafting it in the year previous to that. But what made me, like, kind of go for it was prior to that, I'd actually been writing young adult fiction, and I had an agent for that. So I signed with my first agent in 2018, my first year of, university, for a young adult contemporary fantasy that was really close to my heart. I'd been writing it since I was a kid, and it had grown and evolved with me. The characters are like my children. Like they're
yeah.
so personal to me. I don't know if you ever get that
Oh,
feeling
I do.
where
I
it's,
do.
yeah, it's like these are real people to me
Mm,
almost,
yeah.
There's still a line, but
Mhm.
and it was so important to me, and we revised it forever. We went out on sub. 2 months later, pandemic.
Yep. Of course.
And I also do think that that book, that we went on sub with wasn't really representative of, my potential as a writer. I think it could have used a little bit more restructuring and work and time. But overall, that book ended up dying on submission. And then the next young adult project I was writing as that was on submission, that died on submission as well after about a year. So I was really, I'm so sorry,
You're right.
scrambling. Also because I was kind of feeling like young adult wasn't for me. Like my second book that died on sub was a lot more on the line between young adult and adult. And my agent straight up said to me, like, would you consider rewriting this as adult? And I was like, no, I really, really want to write YA for some reason. And I think that book dying was like the reality check that I needed to pivot. I still wanted to write fantasy. I still wanted to write sci-fi, but I was like, I'm going to try writing an adult book. So I took that mods idea. I was like, it's not at a school, but I could age it up to like grad school age. That's okay for adult. And I think this could be like dark academia. I think it could have some really heavy themes. So I started exploring that, working on it. I think I ended up leaving my agent in like the summer of, I'm really bad with timelines,
It's all
but
right.
a couple years ago, like a summer, I was like, hey, it's not really working out, completely professional. And then I think a year later, I had that finished version of Mothsblood that was ready to query. And that really was my aim, is like, okay, fresh start, left my agent, writing in a new age category that I was really loving. I still love adult fantasy. Wish I'd done it sooner. And this is like my shot because this idea I could tell had a lot of potential. So I was really like racing toward the finish line there to
Yeah,
get it.
and it's always great to me when like when we come to that realization of what ultimately what we like writing. I think it's as much as we like writing a specific type. For you as young A, for me it's sports. Realizing what really we really vibe with is important. I think that's a big part of what makes a writer successful. Ultimately, is like when you find that thing that makes you passionate and just keep going with it and just willing to run through a wall. For you, it's been a long time to run through that wall. It just feels like we actually get to that point where we're like, oh, this feels really good. You actually, believe it or not, you are one of my first guests who has an agent, because a lot of are self-published. But overall, like, what was that process like for my readers and my listeners who don't know querying and who want to learn about the traditional publishing process?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I can talk because I had to do it twice, which
Yeah,
was super educational, if nothing else. Um, sorry, I'm gonna like adjust
sorry.
this. I would say that it requires a lot of patience, but you also never know when you're gonna like strike lightning. Like
Mm.
the first time that I queried, I was like cold querying, and then I ended up kind of impulsively, going for a Twitter pitch competition called DV Pit that now runs, I think, on Blue Sky. They're doing it on Blue Sky this year, and it's for any type of any author with any type of marginalized identity who's looking for an agent and has a full manuscript. So I submitted a couple of like one sentence pitches, and through that I was able to find my first agent. So that was kind of like an unorthodox process, I think. But I did cold
Mm.
query, and it had been like I think a month or so, and I had no bites at all. And then for the second time around, I knew I had like a very, if nothing else, commercially hooky kind of book with Mothsblood. I think like dark academia set in Paris. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, it's pretty fun.
Mhm.
And I also knew that the dark academia window was closing, so I queried a little faster than I might have. And I was kind of expecting it to be a long haul. They say that querying is easier if you've been agented already, but because I didn't sell a book, so I had no sales record, I was like, how much different could it really be?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think the process was basically finish the book to the best of my ability, write a query letter, write a synopsis. Had a couple of my friends who have queried successfully, like I don't know if you know Cam Fajardo or Chris.
Mm.
Yeah, had them look over it, got a lot of feedback, made sure to make those elements, the query letter and the synopsis, very, very strong because I don't know, they represent your book. Polished up the first 10 to 50 pages of Mothsblood really well because that's usually the sample size agents ask for. And then I was like making my list of who to query. And I was really, really particular. I really wanted to work with someone this time around who would be like a career long
Mm-hmm.
advocate, business partner. So I was very particular. I looked at sales records, what authors they'd represented. Um, yeah. So all that. And then I queried, and I think within like a week, which is actually insane and wild, I had
Mm-hmm.
my first full request. And that was really exciting. You send over the full manuscript, the agent reads it and sees if this is something that they want to represent. In my case, it was a yes. So we hopped on a call and like talked about, business strategy, submission strategy for the book, what I was writing next, where my career was going. And then I got the official offer of representation. And that was when I notified all the other agents who had the query and, you know, kind of went from there. So I think I was lucky enough to get 5 offers. So I was able to choose, and it was a very difficult choice, but I'm very happy.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's awesome because truthfully, like I like people who know me. I'm just like I'm kind of I'm very much in between whether or not traditional or self pub because it's just like just like you weigh the options and I'm like But you did mention something that I was found very interesting is that the dark academic window you felt was closing, and that's the hard thing with like querying is that you have to find a trend and kind of hopefully kind of see. So I mean, when it comes to trends, like how difficult is it to kind of identify when your trend is closing because that's a really tough thing for a lot of people because right now like for example a lot of romance writers wanting into that hockey ice skating type of romance and it's
Uh-huh.
very strange to me that as a hockey editor hockey romance is very popular but just the concept like how do you know when how do you feel is it more a feel or is it like there's some signs that are telling you that your window is closing you better get this book and queried fast.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, Mothsblood, around the time I was querying, I was like, it already closed.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's always that little doubt. I don't think a trend ever fully closes. I think a
Mhm.
lot of it depends on how you pitch it. Like, for example, around the time I was querying Mothsblood, probably just any old dark academia wouldn't do, but I had, kind of the setting twist and some other stuff. But for how to identify a trend, it seems maybe easy because at least in fantasy, I think it's very apparent to me what subgenres are getting acquired more. So if you're keeping track of what's being acquired, but
Mhm.
also what's like hitting the bestseller list, especially new authors, like debut authors or authors who aren't a household name, like Suzanne Collins.
Yep.
Um, I think, for example, right now we're seeing gothic fantasy having a moment in fantasy, and I think dystopian is right around the corner. I kind of am predicting a little bit of a tech dystopian, so like cyberpunk, because there's a lot of the AI.
Hope for me.
Yes, yes, yes. Get on that, Paul.
I am.
Um, but you can also kind of see if some. I'm gonna close the window. Sorry, the
You're fine.
birds are going wild. But if someone big and established is kind of treating new ground. For example, Chloe Gong, who wrote These
Mm.
Violet Delights, is represented by my agent, is coming out
Nice.
with Coldwire, which is a cyberpunk. And cyberpunk hasn't really seen a ton of movement. Like, there's not really that many modern cyberpunk YA books, right?
No.
But I think that kind of first breakthrough with Coldwire potentially could, lead to the subgenre really popping off. Um, and the caveat here is that I think if you're paying attention, yes, it's easy to recognize trends, but publishing is really slow. And so the books that we're seeing coming out this year were written, acquired, edited 1.5 to 2 years ago.
Mhm.
So there's always kind of like that delay, that lag in what we're seeing and what was getting really actively picked up. So I guess my other pointer would be to keep track of what's going on in terms of acquisitions and what's being sold through something like Publishers Marketplace.
Yeah, you mentioned Chloe Gong, and I'm like, I just started reading one of her books, which is great. It's on my TBR, it's on my room somewhere, like it's on my shelf. I'm
Nice.
like, all right, it's on my list. You got to read it. But now I'm glad to know that Cyberpunk might come in because I do have a comic slash novelization version of a Cyberpunk samurai story that I'm working on with an artist right now. So it's like we're still in early stages of it, but
That's awesome. I feel
mhm.
like that too, like right away. Cyberpunk and Samurai, that's a hook. That's
Yep, that
commercial.
is yeah, it's commercial, and truthfully, I'm gonna probably start the YouTube like writing vlogs shortly. And I'm still coordinating with my editors and coordinating with my artists to kind of see what we can do combination wise. But that's like another probably like a week away, so we'll figure
Yeah.
that out. But overall, just it's like writing journey is taking. Like, you've been taking us on your writing journey on the writers' blogs and everything else. What do you feel makes a writing vlog great? I think I mean, because you're. I mean, I know I'm going to say it. You're one of the more popular ones out there for me because I really love your stuff, and I actually sent to my editor, be like, "This is our reference. Let's go with it." So, so let's like, what do you think goes into a writing vlog versus just a normal, just like, oh, this is what I wrote for the week.
Honestly, I don't know if I have like a concrete answer for that, but
Mm-hmm.
thank you. That's so nice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just like, showing personality, showing the good and the bad. So, yeah, I mean, people kind of love to see your downs. I've noticed.
Oh.
I'll be like, I'm crashing out over this book, and they're like, I don't know, engagement goes up. I don't know what that says about this community, but no, I'm kidding. Yeah, I think it really is just about being authentic, showing the process, really showing it. And also, again, I think what I'm finding more and more is that viewers respond to my self reflection. So if I'm, going through this process, revising, having a hard time with it, and I'm able to sit down and really dissect like what went well, what I could improve on in a really succinct way that maybe resonates with writers going through something similar, that kind of tends to, I think, elevate a writing vlog. Um, yeah, and I think, anything for me, these actually are my less popular videos, but anywhere where I'm like, I went to a different location with the writing retreat. So
I saw that. I
anytime
saw
I'm
your
switching up my
illustration.
routine or
Mm-hmm.
going somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, I saw your writing retreat. Your most recent video was a writing retreat video, and I really did enjoy like watching it. I mean, it's just one of those things where I was like, oh, this is cool. I mean, I live in Vegas, so like I think the closest ones to me will be Southern California. So it's
Mhm.
like, I think Southern California, I need to find a community in Southern California that will do stuff like that. But overall, it just felt like, your writing retreat vlog, I really enjoyed just because it was like,
Oh,
oh, you got to see other people and, you get to see the vibes of like your writing community and everything like that. So, I think personally, like when it comes to my videos, I'm trying to figure out like, how do I be authentic, but also taking that authenticity and like leveling up just a little bit just to be for camera ready. I think that's the hardest part for people is that they don't understand that you can't just be like your base version. You have to take it up a few steps a little bit. And do you feel
mhm.
that way sometimes when you're recording videos, like being who you are?
I think so. I think it's kind of been, I've oscillated between feeling like I'm very, very reserved on camera.
Mm-hmm.
Because honestly, like I'm, trying to be a teacher. My students very easily find me every time.
Yep. Yep.
And
They
like I
do.
don't necessarily, yeah, want them to see me like being all, I don't know. But I think I am kind of embracing myself and especially like my artistic side and my creative
Mm-hmm.
side. I'm a little bit quirky. I'm a little bit
Mm-hmm.
weird, like we all are. And I think, yeah, allowing myself to show that on camera is my version of stepping it up a little bit, I think.
Yeah. I mean, as a former teacher, it's like one of those things where I think it's weird because we do have to like switch on a different type of mindset. I think it feels like you have to be like professional but fun. It's like this is this whole like
Yeah.
the balancing act of multiple personalities. It feels like we have to do as teachers. I feel you transitioned that to YouTube very well because it's just like, oh, it's a performative art, but at the same time it's like informational in some way, shape, or form. You're trying to convey
Yeah.
something.
No, yeah, yeah, you get it because I think my teacher persona and my author to persona are kind of similar.
Oh,
And
really?
it's not like I'm being fake or anything. It's just
Mm-hmm.
presenting myself a little bit differently given a
Mm-hmm.
context in which, it's people where I want to have a little bit of a distance between my personal life and like who I am for them, right? You're sinking into a different role. And I think it's a very normal thing. Like, I don't know, we don't owe anyone anything. We don't have to like emotionally stripped down every time we're on
Mm-hmm.
camera, right? So yeah, I'm glad you're a teacher too. Sometimes it's like hard to explain some of the teacher
Oh, no,
things.
no, no. But at the same time, it's like one of those unique situations where like the only people who'll ever get us are teachers. It's kind of weird. It's so weird how that works out. Like, oh, we can't explain. Like, I try like like I'm trying to get back in because I was first left for 3 years because COVID burned me out. Like I will say,
Here, oh
COVID,
my gosh, yeah,
COVID burned me out. So for me to try and get back in it, but overall, it's just like people they try to explain like the teacher problems. The only people ever know is like could you imagine if you're like the people you're managing are a fraction of your age and they're like that's how you look at it, like the people who you're managing are a fraction of your age and they don't understand completely what you're teaching them, so it's like that's how you look at it. Like it's hard to explain that, and I think from my perspective as an English teacher at one point I'm like, yeah, but as you were moving on with writing, just like overall, like what are some of the things that you found worked for you in terms of creating a routine? Because I think that's one of the biggest things for a lot of people is that, routine is everything. And as teachers, we both understand that routine is important.
Yeah, routine is important. I honestly, because I've been in grad school for the past year, I think my routine has gotten really messed up.
Oh,
But I
okay.
do try to like, I don't know, I have my so setting and surrounding are very important to me. Like I kind of, if I'm in public writing, I need big noise canceling headphones. I need to kind of like disengage from my surroundings. Um, yeah, I think just making sure I go through the routine of having a nice, tidy desk and having a drink, really like putting myself into that mindset by doing these little physical rituals every time. And I also read before I write, but in terms of like a daily structured writing routine, I'm trying to get back into it, man.
It's so
We're trying
hard.
to find it again. Grad school kind of it killed me a little
Hmm.
bit.
Yeah, I feel that because I'm in an MFA program right now, so it's like,
Yeah.
creative writing. So it's like, okay, well, I want to work on this other project. I want to work on this project, and like, balancing all the things out, and doing work, and this is like, it's a very difficult balancing act. So just trying to find the space and time to do it. You know, one thing I did want to ask you is, you mentioned that you take your ideas and run with it, right? You take your ideas and wait a little bit. You mentioned Mothsblood was like a conversion of your young day, but your new project, how long are you sitting on your new project?
Um, so I guess my new project would be Project Crypts, which is like a
Yep.
gothic fantasy.
Mhm.
And I just mentioned I noticed gothic fantasy is trending up, so I gotta get on that.
Yeah.
But I have been sitting on it in some form. Um, yeah, probably around the same amount of time, like at least 4 or 5 years. But it looked very different when I first came up with it. It was more of a modern setting with um like organized crime, but as an adult, I don't really enjoy organized crime stories that much, if I'm being
Mhm.
honest. So I kind of, adapted it to be a more historical based setting with these like noble families, which is basically the same thing as organized crime, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, kind of just letting it marinate. And I say I have like a new idea for it every day, every other day. So it's kind of exciting to see that notes document populate.
Oh, nice. Like, and I know you're in revision. Are you still in revisions for Mothsblood?
Hmm.
How's that going? Like, how's that going?
It's all right.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, because
It is. It is what it is. Right now it's kind of
mm,
just like the nitpicky. That sounds rude, but like yeah,
it
I
really
mean,
is. I mean, the
we're
minutia.
not changing the structure or anything, so
Yeah.
just kind of going through consistency, line edits. Yeah. And we're very close to the finish line for that one, I think.
Awesome. I think a lot of people, like you mentioned that, I think in your last writing vlog, your reading writing tree one, you mentioned that you went from a place of like being shy about your writing to being comfortable. Like it's
Mhm.
one of those like how do you overcome that initially? It's like, like do you feel there's a technique or is there anything that you can do specially? Because a lot of writers have to get over that fear of publishing. They have to get over that fear of being critiqued. I think, it's a very tough thing, for a lot of new writers to understand. So, what can you say about like that aspect and trying to build tougher skin basically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, a lot of it has come hand in hand with personal growth. I do think that ultimately, for most people, I don't want to speak for everyone, but for most people, that fear of having your writing perceived, it comes from like personal insecurities. So maybe you're not fully secure in yourself, which, like, is everyone, right?
Yeah.
Show me a 100% confident person. I've never met
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
But I think over time, for me, as I've aged, I've become naturally more confident, but also like AuthorTube, just sharing little bits and pieces of my journey, meeting other authors who are feeling similarly, talking. I mean, there's a lot of validation in that community, and it kind of helps you feel like you are less alone and less weird if you are engaging in a space like that. And I'm not saying that the solution to get over fears of publishing or having your work read is always going to be AuthorTube, but something similar in terms of just putting yourself out there, finding community. If you've written a story, written a book, or if you've started, you are a writer. So like embrace that mindset, don't feel shy about it. I know that like a lot of people outside of writing don't understand really, and the first question most writers get when they're like, "Oh, I'm a writer," to someone outside of writing is like, okay, so what have you published? But it's really not about that. Like, you can write just to write. And if you do want to publish, I think the first step to feeling confident in being able to do that is to embrace the fact that you are already a writer if you've written, and to really just own your work and own what you've accomplished, because writing is an accomplishment that not everyone can do or everyone wants to do for good reason. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done, but I'm here to say, like, just embrace the fact that you are a writer.
Hmm. Did you feel at any point that your writing journey, having it be so public, having your writing journey be so public, kind of contributed a little bit to a little bit of confidence, a little bit? Not to say that everyone should start a YouTube and launch their writing vlogs and everything like that, but did that kind of help you as in that perspective, and knowing that by putting out my struggles, there might be other people and reaching out to you? Because I think a lot of people, like, whether or not they publish a video or not, more along the lines of like they see you, they see what you're going through and kind of relate to you to a degree.
Yeah, I would say it definitely helped increase my confidence, because it's that feeling of like, I went from being the only person I knew in real life who'd ever written a book or like wanted to publish, to having literally dozens of friends who are on the same or similar journeys to me, right? Um, and I think, yeah, there's that initial, it's a very similar kind of fear, a very similar kind of awkwardness to the fear of sharing your writing, to like make content and put yourself out there. But it's something that I just like, I don't know, pushed through and overcame. And with that came an increased confidence in my work, in myself, and my writing.
Yeah, no, I just feel like it's a very tough thing for me. It was like I wrote a lot of I read a lot of nonfiction. I think is one of my things is that I spent most of my career as a sports writer, so that's where build the foundational confidence. I feel for me, in the perspective that I just found it so good to see. No matter what, I have to push publish. I have to turn this into an editor. I have to do this. I have to, like, it has to go to someone. It has to be out there on the internet for everyone to read, and just and there'll be people who hate it, people who love it, and I just you just got to look at it from the perspective that you did something that most people are afraid to do, which is put yourself out there in terms of perspective
Mhm.
of writing. I think one of the things I wanted to ask you also was like short stories. How much did writing short stories kind of help you in terms of like building to that functional, like, bigger storytelling concept?
I think I kind of had like a reverse process with that. I
Hmm.
started with novels, but once I kind of stepped into short stories, which was only a few years ago, um, one, it helped me like just kind of explore ideas that couldn't carry a whole novel, which was a good outlet. And two, because with short stories, if you do want to publish them and go through that editorial process, I actually went through that before I did stuff like that for Mothsblood. I think it's a good look into expectations of polish, and
Hmm.
also like what working with a professional editor for a magazine or wherever might look like. So it was helpful from that logistical kind of industry adjacent standpoint. But in terms of structure and stuff, I think short story structure is very different from novel structure, but I can definitely see how it helped with pacing, with prose, with like that quick character development, because you have
Hmm.
literally less space to develop those characters. So how do you define them right away? How do you explore a theme through events and circumstances, thoughts, rather than just laying it out on the page? So yeah, there's all these little lessons that can be found with short story writing if you look for them. And I do think I've been able to apply quite a few of them to my long form work as well.
It's funny because I hear a lot of like older, like, advice when it comes to writing. Is like, oh, write short stories, then go to novel. For me and you, it feels like we're going the opposite end. we started
Yeah.
we started we started with novels first, and then slowly got into the short story because I was telling my friend yesterday, like, maybe I can do a short story now, like in the world that I, kind of dive myself further in the world, my cyberpunk world, and kind of like go point a different area of it out and kind of go from there. So it's like, he's like, yeah, go for it. Like, you just got to understand that you got less space. I'm like, well, less space is good for me because I used to be a journalist. So you tell me 1,500 words, I'm like, oh, that's plenty. so so it's like it's a weird feeling. And so, I'm glad that I'm not the only one who actually had to work backwards from novel to short story form, which is great. I mean, it feels like there's different ways to approach writing, and I think, it feels like, we kind of emulate who we read. So who are some of the people that you find to be influential in your writing per se, in terms of just like you see when you read, you're like, oh, that sounds like this person.
Yeah. Sorry, give me 1 second. I have to plug in
No
my
worries.
laptop while I think
That's all right.
about this question. I think that, I mean, the people that I really look up to in the speculative fiction space are people who kind of tread the line between genre fiction, literary fiction, and who specifically use like speculative elements to explore human condition, relationships, emotion, you know, development. And for me, I think Alex E. Harrow is someone I am obsessed with. I've read like everything she's written. Definitely a huge influence. Uh, Ken Liu, fantastic, fantastic short story collection. The Paper Menagerie, or is it? It has a tiger on the front, but I don't think it's called the Paper Tiger. But his short story collection blew my mind. It just showed me how much flexibility there is in that space. Um, Lainey Taylor, she writes young adult, but I mean, regardless, very, very influential as well. Just in terms of the depth of her imagination and how she's able to make something honestly so weird and so different from any other fantasy world you've seen, probably with her book Strange the Dreamer, and how she makes it so believable still. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many. I read a lot of literary fiction. I've been reading Ocean Vuong, who's also, a poet. Um, and I have been reading some more translated fiction. I think it's hard to like really pinpoint. Sorry, I'm like looking at my shelves like
Yeah, no,
who
they're
do I
right.
know?
Yeah.
I think it's hard to pinpoint really any singular, even a handful of singular influences, because I
Mm-hmm.
think you are what you eat,
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to eat diversely and to eat a lot of different types of books.
Oh
So
yeah.
I can draw from all of them as much as possible.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that you're reading translated books. Like the first book that really said you should really pursue writing because while I did write as a kid, right, slowly loved writing was the book Battle Royal back, the book Battle Royal, which was the precursor to Hunger Games. I mean, Japanese version, but translated that it was like 600, like a 600, 700 page book that I read in high school in like a week. So, you know, but that taught me a lot about character development because it has like roughly, it doesn't have like a true main character, it has like 40 different character perspectives.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like that taught me a lot about character development and like how important the characters are to the story because they each one felt real, despite only maybe having a chapter and a half dedicated to them. And I think it's just being able to take different elements from the things we read. I think that's important. I think like I say this all the time in my MFA program on the message boards, like on my discussion boards, like I might not read romance, but you suggest me a good romance book, I will pick something up from it.
Oh yeah.
It's just whether it's the relationship, like how to write a relationship building, and then literary fiction is the human mind contemporary, like the internal struggle of man in speculative fiction, world building. I always say that you learn from things you read, and what is the biggest thing you've learned from your readings that have applied to your work?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned just from reading is like how to describe emotion, like how to describe
Mhm.
how you're feeling, how to follow a train of thought. It's all these like, I mean, the thing about, prose and I guess poetry to an extent, but mostly thinking about prose here, that's different from other types of storytelling like film, um, like, music even,
Mhm.
is how much time you get inside a character's head, I think, or how much time you get inside the writer's head, depending on the kind of writing that you're reading. And I think that being able to uniquely, but also accurately in a way that like resonates with people, describe what something feels like, describe, you know, someone's train of thought as they're, I don't know, running away from a series, like all these different moments that
Mhm.
don't aren't happening to us but can feel like they're happening to us through writing. There's like a level of immersion that is very different to me from the sensory immersion of like TV and film, which I love TV and film.
Mhm.
um, that is very internal, is very introspective. And so I think learning how to do those things to make that inner world feels so real and lived in is one of the things that I have learned and I'm still trying to learn about from reading, just to see how different authors approach that. Because I think we all kind of experience a different reality, just
Mhm.
how we process, how we think, how we feel things, informed by, our experiences, but also just who we are as people. Our brains are all
Mhm.
wired a little bit differently. And I think it's really cool to be able to see that through writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this does, and I think a lot of people just like look at it from like, oh, it's just like another form of art. Like, no, it's a very different experience, I think, from things. And I think it's important to acknowledge different experiences that people go through and just the realities. Like, some people, like, classic literature theory is like some people will interpret a text differently. And that's, the reader response is always gonna be different things. So it's like, just how it is. So, as we slowly wind down here, just like, what piece of writing advice would you have for a first time writer? Just trying, like, other than the very popular one, just write. That's what that one everyone says. So I'm just like gonna get that one out of the way. But what advice do you have for writers who want to just like get over the hump, so to speak, in a sense that they just want to do it?
I think just like have fun with it. Like
Mhm.
follow the idea that especially if you're just starting out, follow the idea that brings you joy. I think the reason that I stuck with writing and was able to develop my craft really early on was because like I was obsessed with my characters and I had so much fun. I was like thinking about them instead of doing my homework, developing the magic system. And yeah, although ultimately that book obviously isn't getting published, it was a huge learning experience in so many ways. So, especially when you're starting out, pursue the ideas that are fun for you, that if that's fan fiction, if that's just random little pieces of poetry written on a piece of paper, it doesn't matter. Be self-indulgent, like
Mhm.
enjoy just the process of creating and, you know, indulging your inner creative. Um and don't worry so much about the other stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. So, well, here's your moment to kind of push, like hype yourself up, kind of give yourself some props and kind of like, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram and YouTube, mostly YouTube at Lynn D. Jung. And yeah, I mean, my debut novel, Mothsblood, is coming out fall 2026. Anyone's
Awesome. Well,
interested in dark academia.
we're all interested. We're gonna say that right now. Oh no, but it's like, no, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate the conversation, and it's just always been, it's one of those things. And I think I'll probably try and loop back with you as we get closer to your book release, so we can talk again. So it'd be great to kind of
Yeah.
like touch base again like that. So,
That sounds
um,
amazing, Paul. Yeah. I
yeah,
can't wait to
definitely.
see how your channel grows.
Oh, I hope it. I'm just, all I know is it consistently matters. So, like, just keep doing it. So,
Yeah.
oh, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch everyone later. Can you just
Yeah.
hang on
Thank
one
you so
second now?
much.
Hang on one second now.
Oh,
All right.